The sponsorship contract formula, if you want, starts out with, first of all, our job is always to preserve sponsors' currency. Sponsors' currency is dollars, time, energy, and reputation. So our job is always show the sponsor how can they have minimum expenditure of currency and have a significant impact in the organization. All right? Why do we do that? Everything we do must be done for sponsors' motivation. And what is sponsors' universal motivation about any project? How do they want the project to go? Fast, cheap, good. So if you're asking for stuff to make your life easier, you're not going to get it. If you're asking for stuff that's going to give the sponsor what they want, then you're going to get it. But they want it how? Fast, cheap, good. So if what you're asking for doesn't make it sound like it's going to go faster or cheaper or better, you're not going to get it. Now, sponsor reputation. How would you preserve a sponsor's reputation? Well, if your sponsor's a lousy public speaker, don't have him stand up in front of 200 people and talk about your project. If your sponsor has a tendency to bite the heads off the direct reports in an unfacilitated meeting, don't let them handle your project without you there provide structure around it. Because it's our job to make the sponsor look how? It's our job to make it look awesome, better, best, amazing, absolutely. Now, people say you can't go back to your sponsor that often, but my experience is very different than that. My experience over the course of my career is I can go back to my sponsors as often as I need, as long as I can demonstrate that with a minimum expenditure of currency, they had a significant impact in the organization. Okay? Now, without getting too much into let's get into the actual formula of it. So the actual contract. People are getting really literal about this. I don't call it this when I'm doing it. I don't call it anything. I just do it. People say, do you write it down? You got to know your sponsor, okay? I have many executives I've worked with over the course of my careers that if you wrote it down, they would be insulted. Why? It would mean that I didn't trust that they were going to deliver on their part of it. So if you're writing it down because that's what the sponsor wants, that's great. If you're writing it down to manage your own resistance about whether the sponsor will come through for you or not, that's not great. So we have to gather intelligence around our sponsors. How do they operate? So let's just take a classic scenario. So on this side, we have the sponsor. On this side, we have the agent. If it's early enough, it could be a champion. So let's take a typical thing that happens. The sponsor calls you into their office, and the sponsor defines what they want to have happen in the organization. And because of who you are, you make offers. Even if the sponsor says, this is what I want to have happen, and you say, I can make that happen, it's still a want and an offer. Now, if the sponsor contract stops there, it will fail universally. Two other things must be defined. What you want or need from the sponsor to be successful, and can you get it? Wants and offers must be negotiated 4 ways. Now, the more specific you are with the sponsor, the higher the likelihood for success. So, if you're in class with me, I asked you to throw some words out of your vocabulary when it comes to sponsors. And they're words like support and commitment and endorsement and encouragement and empowerment and engagement and whatever other dreaded E words you currently have floating around this organization. Because you're going to go into your sponsor's office and say, I need your support in this project. And their automatic response is, you've got it. And when you leave that office, what do you have? Nothing except a warm, fuzzy feeling. Okay? So we're not the more specific and structured you are at the sponsor, the higher the likelihood for success. So I do not ask for support or commitment. I ask, I need you to be in a meeting from 4 to 5 on Friday afternoon to say these 2 things. Can you do that? Now, the psychological contract is what we're establishing here around expectations. One of the hardest things you'll ever have to do with a sponsor, in fact, one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do in any relationship, is ask for what you want. And I've said this to some of you before, it's taken me a long time to learn this, particularly in my personal relationships, but I have finally figured out that if I ask for what I want, it significantly improves the probability I might receive it. If she truly loved me, she would have known what I needed. No, she has no earthly idea. Ask for what you want. So the specificity is what we bring to this. Why? Each specific ask is a test of commitment. So with each ask is a test of commitment. With each ask is an engagement. So we're trying to build a collaborative outcome on the part of the sponsors here. And what are we asking for from sponsors? When that sponsor leaves that session, what do I need the sponsor to know? What am I asking them to? They need to know what we need them to do. Action, right? Asking for action is, why is asking for action your defense? It's measurable and it's immediate, and the feedback on it is because I can see it. They should be measurable in some way based on you should be able to see it or hear it. Even words like, I need you to communicate. That means nothing. You see, why the specificity is so important for you, why every ask is a test of commitment. Even if you ask the sponsor for what they want and they can't give it to you, they say no, even partial ownership for the outcome transfers to the sponsor. Because in that no, they have to own the no. Now my job is to educate them as to the price they're going to pay for the decision they made. Are you willing to pay that price? So for the no, I have to educate the sponsors the price that they pay for the decisions they make. So your sponsor contract is only as valid as your courage to challenge it when it's violated. So to contract with a sponsor, we're a project team. Who should be contracting with that sponsor? The person with the trust and credibility. That you have to have the trust and credibility of the sponsor. So when there will be difficult conversations with sponsors. I asked you to do this 3 weeks ago. I'm not seeing any sign of evidence that that's occurred. What's getting in your way of doing this? Okay? And that question means that in my head, that sponsor has turned back to being a target. So you guys need to understand those journeys from being a target to a sponsor, or a target to an agent, a target to a champion, are not permanent journeys. They have to be sustained and maintained. That psychological transition. So if you're sitting across from your sponsor and your sponsor says to you, why are we doing this again? Folks, this is not sponsor language. What is that? That's target language, right? So you know in your mind, even though I may have drawn that individual in a sponsor box, they're not psychologically at sponsor at this point. So wants and offers must be negotiated 4 ways. The more specific you are with the sponsor, the higher the likelihood for success. Even if you ask for what you want, you can't get it, you're in better shape. Number one, you've educated the sponsors the prices you think they need to pay, and they have to own the no. Now, if the gods truly want to drive you crazy, they grant your wishes, and the sponsor gives you what you've asked for. Now we have a problem, right? If the sponsor's given us what we've asked for, what's our problem? We have to deliver on it. So if we get what we need, now we got a real issue because we got to deliver on this. And we can no longer blame sponsorship, which is an interesting hobby in this organization, right? But here's the thing. Let's say this is the first time you've ever heard about this project. Am I going to be able to specifically define what I want or need? No. So what's one of the first things I have to ask for? I have to ask for permission to recontract. And once again, that is not the language pattern I will use. I will say to my sponsor something like, I need one 15-minute phone call once a month with you. What is the expectation I'm trying to establish on the part of the sponsor by asking for that? That contracting is cyclical and iterative. That what I need now is not what I'm going to need a month from now. It's not what I'm going to need 5 months from now. All right? It's not a one-time thing. If I don't ask permission to recontract in some form, what does the sponsor think has happened after that initial session? We're good. We're driving home, right? That was easy. Now, I know this is really countercultural, but I always ask for permission to make mistakes. Meaning I will say, when I screw up, not if, but when, because I'm predictable, I'm going to need your help. Can I come back and get it? What we're trying to establish on the part of the sponsor with those two conversations is something really simple. That there are unintended consequences. There are bumps in the road that neither the sponsor nor I can currently anticipate, that only the sponsor can fix. So I want to make sure those expectations are established. Now, if you can do all this, sponsors are no different than anybody else. They can't do 15 things at once. So my job is to prioritize what I need from the sponsor. How do I prioritize what I need from the sponsor? What do sponsors do? So we're only ever going to ask the sponsor for what only the sponsor can do. How do we prioritize what we want from our sponsors? It's our job to prioritize it, not the sponsors. What do sponsors do? They express, model, and reinforce. But these are not all of the same priority. So what that means is I've got to be able to figure out right now what are the 2 or 3 or 4 actions I require from my sponsor right now that's going to have the significant biggest impact on speed and quality of this implementation. So there is a psychological threshold for that which you can ask for at a given time from a sponsor. It is typically not more than 2 or 3 or 4 things. So given that it's only 2 or 3 or 4 things, that also, for the sponsor, reiterates in their brain that contracting is cyclical and iterative, right? That we're going to come back with a couple more different things next time I come back, right? So these are not all of the same priority. So you can always make up for your sponsor's inability or lack of willingness to communicate. You know, you can build the press kit, you can build the slide deck, you can get the choir and the dancing bears. What you can't make up for is your sponsor's inability or lack of willingness to reinforce. Now, if all this has been done, wants and offers have been negotiated, you've permission to recontract and expectations of bumps in the road, you have the potential to form very powerful sponsor contracts. Something must be done before you leave initial contracting sessions, though, and that is you must check for feelings of vulnerability on the part of the sponsor. If I've asked for too much, if I've expended too much of the sponsor's currency, if the sponsor is feeling too vulnerable, I am in danger of motivating my sponsor from going from sponsor back to being target. Okay? But the interesting thing is this. If the sponsor does not possess enough vulnerability, simply put, if the sponsor has no skin in the game, they're going to be a lousy sponsor. So that means if I have not asked, I've actually guaranteed or engendered the poor sponsorship I sought to avoid. So that means you have to engage. Now, this is only done with authorizing sponsors. So I have 2 conversations with the sponsor. And they are difficult conversations, and you can frame them any way you want, but one is around cost and one is around risk. And they sound like this. What is it going to cost the organization to get this done? That's an easy conversation. What is it going to cost the sponsor personally to get this done? And the most difficult conversation is the conversation around risk. What happens to the organization if this doesn't work? What happens to the sponsor personally if this doesn't work? And if the sponsor comes back and says, nothing's going to happen to me, it's all going to happen to you, you have failed to establish collaborative ownership for the outcomes of the change, and you have some serious career decisions to be made. So sponsor contracting is the single greatest survival skill I could ever give you out there. So any contracting session for me starts with establishing rapport. I know that sounds really simple, but we at IMA work all over the world, and there are culturally specific behaviors about establishing rapport. So that looks very different in Southeast Asia than it does in the United States, than it does in Saudi Arabia. You may have in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, you may have dozens of meetings just to establish rapport before you get to do anything else. Then after that, I set the expectations. And they're not expectations for the projects, they're expectations for that meeting. So I will say, I'm going to be in your office for 30 minutes today. I'm going to give you a quick update on what's happened with AIM so far. I'm going to see if you have any questions about what's happened so far and any concerns. And then I'm going to tell you when we're going to meet again. Right? The third thing is then if I have to, I'm going to do an update. Very important to psychologically separate update from contracting. It gets all muddled otherwise. So every update that I give this sponsor is going to finish with 2 things. Do you have any questions about what's gone on so far or anything I've said? Do you have any concerns? Why do I finish with questions and concerns? So I'm asking questions, what's your resistance? I'm asking concerns, what's your resistance? So I've got 2 rounds of surfacing resistance. Because Wendy's spot on. I need to know that they're in sponsor mode before I go into contracting, not in target mode before I go into contracting. Then I go through the actual contracting. In contracting, the first thing I have to first thing I have to touch upon is their motivation. So I have to say, when we originally met in January, you said this was critical to the organization and this is where you wanted to go, right? So if you can use something that they've said, great. If you can use something they've written, great. Then I go into my asks. I have to affirm or confirm after each ask. I want to include this in your town hall meeting. Can you do that? Move to confirm or confirm after each ask. And you're probably going to only do this two or three times. And then you're going to go into reset, which would be to say, yeah, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to get on your calendar some point in the next 4 weeks for 30 minutes, just by a virtual. So I'm going to move to preserve the sponsor's currency, and then we're going to talk about what progress we've made and what I'm going to need from you as a sponsor on this project. If you ask them for too much at one time, they won't deliver on any of it. So that is the abridged version of contracting.